Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to tapaScript, the channel where you learn programming fundamentally, along with projects and hands-on coding. Today we are going to learn about JavaScript's async and await. I hope you are following the initiative 40 days of JavaScript. I'm so glad to bring it to you. And today we are going to talk about the async await as part of the 24th video of 40 days of JavaScript initiative. If you have not checked it out, please go ahead and take a look into this playlist. I'm sure that you are going to learn JavaScript not only fundamentally, but with lot of tasks, lot of assignments, and lot of hands-on projects. Along with JavaScript, I also teach React, Next.js, TypeScript, open source, and a bunch of tips around your career. So make sure you subscribe to tapaScript and also join tapaScript as a member to enjoy all the perks that I provide. Thanks to all the existing members for supporting tapaScript in this way. All right, so let's get started with today's topic, async and await. First, let's see what are we going to cover today as part of this video. We're going to cover a lot in today's video. First, we're going to get started with promises. What are the problems? But hang on, we spoke a lot about promises in the last video, spoke a lot of good things about promises. And what could be the problem? Yeah, so there are few things, right, that we need to definitely speak about the downside of promises, and that's one of the reason that why async await exists today. I'm going to touch base on that. Then how are you going to migrate from promise to await, basically async and await, the thought process of you have a promise and how are you going to migrate to it. You might be having some legacy code in promises, you want to translate that to async await, or you are going to write the code of async await, but for that you must have the fundamental knowledge of promises, otherwise you will fail in debugging async await code. I can guarantee that. Next, we're going to talk about the async function. We're going to talk about the async await together. Then a question that comes always in interviews, always in the mind of curious developers: does await make things synchronous? Because we say that whenever JavaScript hit await, it seems that it halts there. Does it mean that we are getting into the synchronous programming? How to think about it? The thought process is what is important when you are learning fundamentals, not mugging about things, not copying about things, not the syntax. It's about the mindset and the understanding of fundamentals we're going to cover there. Then error handling with async and await. We're going to see some project example. I'm going to build a project and I want you to follow me to build that project. Then we'll touch base on top level await. We're going to talk about how to handle multiple async await in your code. A bunch of it we have seen in the previous video using promises. We are going to talk about the same thing but with async await into the picture. Then the famous pizzahub example. Oh man, this is not leaving us, isn't it? We started with pizzahub with the callback video. We have implemented something using callback. Then we have simplified it a lot using promises. And now we are going to simplify even more using async await. And finally, I have given you bunch of tasks and an assignment and a project also to build, because now you know about callback, you will know about promises, at the end of it you will know about async await. You are all set to build a project yourself. So check out for the task and assignments, and you must be doing it and submitting to our Discord. All right, so let's get started with the first one, the promises. What are the problems? So what's the problem with promises that we are learning async await? Actually, there is no problem with promises. Async await exists because promise exists. The only thing that we speak about as a problem about promises is the syntax. Here we have a promise which is created using the constructor function, and we use the new keyword to create the instances of the constructor function, that is instances of the promises in this case, which takes an executor function as an argument. We have learned that from the previous video. The executor function takes two more callback called resolve and reject. Once your asynchronous operation is done, you handle the success of it using resolve, so that you can notify the consumer of this promise that what is the result or the outcome of that asynchronous function. If there is an error happen, you notify the consumer again using something called reject. That's why this resolve and reject exists. How do you notify? We have handler methods we have learned. One of the handler method is called then. Using that, you know if there is a resolve happen for this particular promise. And if the resolve happen, you get the resolved value in this particular callback function of then, and then you can do anything with that particular resolve value. In this case, this x is the resolve value, and I am just doing a console.log of x. what is the value of x? As we are seeing a set timeout inside this promise, it means that we are mimicking an asynchronous operation. It means after 1 second, I'm resolving this promise with this particular value. Now this resolve value will be available over here as a value of x so that I can do something with it. Possibly the only problem with promises is the syntax. The chaining of .then, .catch, multiple then, multiple catch might be overwhelming at certain point of time. Because whenever we see in programming that there are so many things as chain means you have an object or you have something, on top of that you have done dot called something, it returns something, again you do dot something dot something dot something. Reading that kind of code at some point in time might be very overwhelming and difficult. So that particular syntax might sound little difficult for developers to read or anybody doing the code review to read, or even at some point of time debugging, putting the debug point on your debugger on a particular point of dot then dot catch might be overwhelming. That's the reason we have a much simplified and the better syntax in the form of async and await keywords. So async and await is nothing but the special syntax to work with promises where developer can more comfortably work with it, can debug it, and this is what the async await is about. So right now, as we know about promises, I think it will be very easy for us to understand how you can convert a promise syntax to an async await syntax so that you don't have to really use this constructor function, you don't have to really use this executor function, you don't have to really explicitly do this resolve, you don't have to do dot then, you don't have to do dot catch, you can just use async await along with JavaScript's own natural syntax like try, catch, finally to manage whole asynchronous programming. So your syntax is going to be very simple. That's the advantage that you're going to gain with async await. Let us now see how to deal with async await, as in what is the syntax of async await. So async is a keyword that usually we place before the function keyword and then provide a name of the function as usual. Let's call it as foo. And when we place the async keyword in front of a function or before a function, it only means that this particular function is going to return a promise. Yes, always. If you return a promise explicitly, fine. If you don't return a promise explicitly, JavaScript will wrap the return value of this function and then return a promise for you. Okay, so let's see that. Let's understand that because this is the source of confusion whenever we deal with async await. Let's return a value 101. So I have a very simple function, but this function is an async function which is returning something called 101. Fair enough. Now let's call foo, and foo is returning 101, a value, right? So let's take this value inside a variable and then do console.log of this particular variable. What do you think will be the output? This function is returning 101. But whatever we have learned from the function so far, it should return 101 and I should see 101 in the log, isn't it? Let's see it. So for line number 28, I see something called a promise. I don't see 101. If I expand that, I see it's a promise. The promise is fulfilled and the result of the promise is 101. So it means, or it sounds like, this particular promise is resolved with the value 101. So line number 28 is this one, my console.log. Now you can completely understand that the moment you put async keyword in front of a function, it always returns a promise. In this case, we have not explicitly returned a promise. We have returned just a number. But what JavaScript has done, as it has seen async keyword in front of the function, it wrapped this particular value in a promise and then returned to me. So the return value I am getting here and I am able to log. Now instead of returning a number, what if I return a promise explicitly? So what if I do promise dot resolve and then the same number? Let's use the same number. So in this case, I'm explicitly returning a promise with the value 101, right? Resolve value 101. So now I'm again calling foo over here and the return value I'm getting inside this particular variable. What will be the output of this value? As I'm explicitly returning a promise, the output of that will be exactly this promise. In this case, JavaScript is not going to wrap it again inside another promise because I'm explicitly returning a promise. If you don't do this explicit returning of a promise, then only JavaScript is going to wrap that value inside a promise and then return that. Okay, so let's see, it will be the same thing. From line number 28 again, I can see this particular promise and I see the promise fulfilled, and again the promise result is 101. You got that? Okay, so I got a promise. Now, as I got a promise, it means that I can resolve this promise. How can I resolve this promise? If I got this particular promise foo, I can do something like dot then on top of it, because once you get the promise, you can get the resolve value using dot then. We know that from the previous video. Now this takes a function. You can do a function something like this, or an arrow function. This function automatically get the result of the resolve value. So you have the result. Now here if you do console.log of result, then you get the actual result logged on your console. You understood the difference? Before I was just printing the output of the foo, but now I know as foo itself is a promise. That means to get the actual value out of that promise, actual resolve value out of that promise, I have to use dot then. If it had rejected, to handle that particular error, I could have done dot catch. So this is a proof right now that this particular foo is returning a promise and I'm able to resolve it and able to print the result. So now the line number 28 is going to print the actual value 101. It is no more printing the promises because we are now tackling the resolve promise value. You understood, right? How async works. Now how await come into picture. So we have seen that async actually solve this particular problem. Can we get rid of this dot then as well? Yes, we can. So instead of doing dot then function result get in this way, I can get rid of this completely, and instead, just like before we did, right? We can do const result equals to foo. But we had seen calling this foo was returning a promise, but I need the actual value. That's the reason. That is the time you will be doing something called await, a keyword in front of the function if you are dealing with an async function that is returning a promise. So in case you want to get the resolve value of a promise that is being returned from an async function, in that case you will be using the keyword called await while you are calling this particular function, and now the result that you are going to get back will be 101, the actual result over here. Okay, now you understand like how we can get rid of dot then, dot then, dot then, things like that. We can just use the keyword await in front of an async function when you're calling this function so that we can actually get the result, the resolved result. Now one thing though, you have to remember, we are calling await in front of this async function at a global level like this. This particular code is not inside any other function. Now if you try to run this and see the output, it gives you an uncaught syntax error. It says await is only valid in async functions and the top level bodies of a module. It has a meaning. So it means at least we know that we cannot use await at a global level like this. Whenever we want to use an await, it has to be inside an async function. So it means that I have to now create another function. Say I'm calling it as tackle promise. And now inside this, I will be able to call this particular function. Now this line of code is resolving a promise and giving me a result. Let's log this result, and as we are using the await keyword, it has to be used inside an async function. Please remember, you cannot use the await keyword at a global level. If you have to use the await keyword, you have to use it inside an async function. Now, when you are calling the async function, you have a choice whether you want to put the await keyword in front of it or not. In this case, we have decided to use the await keyword in front of foo because we wanted a resolve value from a promise. But in this case, I know this particular promise has been resolved already, and what it is doing, it got the value, and with that value, I have done something. I have just logged that value inside the console.log. So I don't have anything further to resolve from this particular async function. So I can choose not to use await in front of it, and I can just call tackle promises without the await keyword. So in this case, tackle promises is going to execute this async function. While executing this async function, it will find an await. Once it finds an await, it is going to resolve the value that this promise foo is returning, and the result value it is going to log inside the console. Now we are going to get same 101 without using any dot then. I'm getting 101 from the line number 29, which is this one, without using any dot then. Now you will ask me question, what tackle promises returns? Tackle promises is a function which doesn't return anything. When the function doesn't return anything, we know it returns undefined. Does it return undefined? No. We have used the async keyword in front of this function, right? Now, if I do a console.log of this particular function, console.log of this particular function, I will still see that this particular function returned a promise. And the result of that promise is undefined because this function is returning an undefined. Can you see that? So I still see it's a promise, and if I expand that, I'll see promise fulfilled and the result is undefined. So you got the point, right? There is no chance that an async function is not returning a promise. Async function is always return a promise, but using the await in front of that async function when you are calling is up to you. If you sure that you want to get the resolve value out of that particular promise that is returned by an async function, you will use the await. If you are sure that no, this particular async function is not returning any result that I have to resolve, I am not going to use the await keyword at all. So I have showed you two examples. In one example, I am explicitly using the await keyword because I want to get the resolve value. And there is another example which is again an async function, but I am not using the await keyword because I am not interested in the resolve value this particular function is returning. Rather, I am interested in what this function is doing inside. And as this function is having await, I'm sure that the line number 29 is going to get executed only after line number 28 is done. Only after this result is resolved, then only I'm going to get into it. Now, with that, I'm getting into that valuable question. Once JavaScript is hitting the line number 28, it is going to get halted. It is not going to move to line number 29 until unless this particular result is out. If this result is taking 2 seconds time, it's going to halt here for 2 seconds before it is going to go to console.log. Does it mean as we are halting at the line number 28, choosing the keyword await to resolve a promise is actually making the code synchronous? Because we are not able to proceed with the execution of 29 unless the line number 28 has been executed. What do you think? What could be the answer? The function execution really pauses at the line number 28. The keyword await literally will suspend this particular function execution until unless this particular promise that is being handled inside foo is settled. What is a settled promise? Either it is resolved or it is rejected. So until this particular promise is resolved or rejected, the execution is suspended over here. But does it mean that I am getting into the synchronous mode? No. JavaScript engine can do other things while the execution is suspended at this particular line. Let's do console.log. I am after tackle promise, and then I have done console.log tackle promise. For the simplicity sake, I have now commented out everything else. So right now I have a function, async function called foo, which return a promise. I'm tackling this promise using the await keyword inside another async function, and then I'm calling that async function. Before that, I'm having a simple console.log. We have learned about the global execution context, the function execution context, all this thing, isn't it? The call stack, all these things. See how those things are related right now. So I'll start with this line number 24. Let's imagine I see a function called foo. Of course, it's a function. Great. Now I will create a memory for this one. I'll keep a reference of it in my global execution context and I'll move on. Now I'll see another function called tackle promise. Yeah, great. This is another function. I'll create a memory for it and I'll again create a reference of it in my global execution context. I move on. Now I will see the console.log over here, isn't it? Because this particular thing is not been called yet, so there is no point of creating a function execution context. This will be executed. Now I will see this tackle promise. The moment I see tackle promise, it means that it is going to get into our call stack. The moment it is going to get into the call stack, this particular function execution context will be started. As the function execution context got started, it means that it will hit this particular line number 29, and this is where this particular function execution at the line number 29 will be halted, because now the promise is being settled. Until it is settled, it will be halted. It is not going to go to line number 30. But it doesn't mean that JavaScript engine cannot do other things. It can execute other scripts. It can handle events. While inside call stack, this tackle promise is being executed and we are still waiting for this particular promise to get settled. Your UI, the other part of the UI where you have a button and there is a click handler on top of it, or there is another script which is probably logging something into a remote database. All these operations are going to happen in parallel, because halting here is not going to cost any CPU resources. JavaScript engine's main thread is still unblocked so that it can perform all other operations. The moment this particular promise is settled, whether it is resolved or it is rejected, this function execution context resumes. It means that it will go to the line number 30, it will execute it, there is no more line after this. So this particular function execution is done, it is come out of the stack. In the future video, session number 26, we are going to go through the concept of event loop. That is where I am also going to show you visually that how the call stack gets impacted, how different queues like job queues, task queues come into picture when we are talking about promises using async await or without async await, or a promise with set timeout or a promise with the fetch API. We'll see everything together in terms of event loop so that you can understand visually that how this entire orchestration is happening. But for now, please remember and please keep a note somewhere saying that yes, await keyword is definitely going to suspend the function execution until this particular promise settles, but it doesn't mean it is occupying the JavaScript main thread. JavaScript main thread is still unblocked to perform operations like executing any other script, managing the event handlers. So the UI, the user interface, is still responsive. User can still click on different parts of the UI. They can still interact because all the event handlers are open to action. Things will happen seamlessly. But this portion of the UI, which is actually waiting for this foo to resolve the value and give the value to you, that particular UI will be waiting. It will be suspended. And that is the reason you will be probably showing a loading indicator only on that part of UI which is resolving this foo promise. You are not going to block the entire UI for this operation. Understood? This is how you should be thinking about async and await. This is exactly the same thing. Now let's go back. Every code that you have written inside this dot then will be suspended, won't be executed until and unless this particular promise is resolved, isn't it? There is no point any code inside this dot then will be ever executed if you don't have this promise resolved. Exactly the same phenomena until unless this is settled, that it is either resolved or rejected. You have the next portion of the code, which is where you are dealing with the result. In this case, which is where you are dealing with the result, is not going to have any impact, any execution until your promise is settled. So error handling with async await is much more simpler. With promises, how did you do it? Let us create an error promise. Const error promise equals to new promise, resolve and reject. And here, let us reject this promise saying error occurred. So, if I take error promise now and can do a dot catch, here I will get the error, and I can do console dot error as error. This is a normal promise way of tackling the error. But in case of async await, let's say you have this particular promise and you are handling it, you can do it much more elegantly. So let's create a function. Let's give it a name called handle error promise. And this is going to handle this particular error promise. So we have to use the await keyword and then this error promise, because it is resolving or rejecting, is basically settling this promise. As we have used the await keyword cannot be used inside a function without async keyword. So I have to use the async keyword in front of it. Now when this function gets executed, for example, I call this function handle error promise over here, JavaScript will see a await keyword at the line number 42. So JavaScript will wait till this particular promise settles. Now this promise settles immediately but with a rejection. But here we are not doing anything to handle this particular rejection. Now to handle this rejection, you just need to put this await statement inside a try catch. I will have the error object and I can do console.log of this particular error. That's it. So when we are calling this particular promise gets settled. If there is a rejection, the rejected error will be inside this error object and we'll be able to deal with it inside the catch. We're seeing the message error occurred, line number 45, which is this console.log. You can make it console.error instead of log, which is more meaningful. So here in the catch, we are able to tackle this particular error. I hope it is clear to you. Now with all that we have learned so far with async await and also previously with DOM, Let us see a project which is called a weather app. What is the weather app project? Here you can type any city name. So for example, let's type Kolkata, city name, city in India, and say get weather. What you're getting here, you're getting the weather for city Kolkata, where temperature is currently as 31.97 degrees centigrade, and the condition is haze, and this is the image of that particular weather condition. So for example, if you change that and change to London, and to get weather, this is the London's weather. Temperature is now 5.77 degrees centigrade, overcast cloud. And this is the weather condition image, like it's a cloudy image. Now let's look into the code of this application. I'm not going to code this application ground up, but I am going to put my view on certain section of this project that I have done, so that you understand it clearly and it helps you to do the project that I have given at the end of this session. And I want you to complete that project along with the assignment. Come to Discord and post about it. All right. So let's go ahead and start looking into the code structure for that. I have a folder called weather. Inside that there is an index.html file, index.js file, and the style file. Index.html file, let's take a look. The head part of it is pretty simple. You know that we have seen it multiple times in 40 days of JavaScript, right? Let's look into this section. I have a H1 which is showing the weather app. Then I have an input text field where I want user to type the city name. I have typed the city name over there. Notice the ID over here. City input is the ID. And then there is a button. I want user to click on that button once they have entered the city name. And I have a div where I want to show a loading indicator. By the time I go over the network, find out this particular weather information and come, I want to show a loading indicator over there. Once I have the result, I want to show the result. If I have an error, I'll be showing the error over here. So this is what I am looking for as a HTML structure. Now let's get into the JavaScript. The JavaScript part of the code is inside the index.js file. What is the first invocation point on this UI? The first interaction point on this UI is, of course, user typing something over here and then they click on this get weather. So let's take the point that they're clicking on this get weather. I'm clicking on the get weather by typing something which doesn't exist. The city doesn't exist, or the API that I'm dealing with doesn't have any data about this particular city because it doesn't find the city. Now in this case, it's returning me an error, the city not found. That is what I am handling. Now, if I am typing some city which exists and again clicking on get weather, it is giving me the result. So on the click on this particular button, I have to get the result of that particular city, right? This is my use case. In the code itself, I'm doing document.query selector of search button. What is search button? Search button is the button which says get weather. I'm adding a click handler and I'm saying that whenever the click happened, please take the value of the city input text box, and if a city input is there, call a function called query weather by passing that city. So if I'm typing London, I'm passing London here. If I'm typing Bangalore, I'm passing Bangalore over here. Now let's look into this query weather function. This is where our async await thing is there. So in the query weather function, I am taking the city as an input. Taking the city as an input, I am calling an API. This is a public API available called Open Weather Map. You can check it out. You just need to register over there using your email ID or credential and create an API key. Once you have the API key, you can call this URL, call https api.openweathermap.org/data/version 2.5/weather, and then Q means query. Pass the city information that we are getting as an argument, and your app ID is nothing but the API ID, and the units you pass as metric, so that you get in Celsius, the value you get in Celsius. So you have this API. Now we know about the fetch little bit, at least we know. We will be having a detailed video on the fetch web API, but we know that fetch is a web API which returns a promise. We can pass an URL to this. By default, it makes a get call, HTTP get call, and try to get you some resources or try to get you some response by making this particular API call. But as this API call happen asynchronously, fetch returns you a promise. Now, as fetch returns you a promise, instead of doing a dot then all these things on top of it, now I am using the await keyword. If I use the await keyword, the return promise of the fetch API will be resolved, and the resolved value will get inside this res variable. The resolved value of the fetch call is a response. Okay, again, the resolved value of on promise is a response, which is an object. So res will have the response object value inside it. The response object will have something called an OK. If the OK is not there, it means this particular call didn't go well. It probably have a network error or some kind of error. I have to handle it. So that's why if the call is not okay, I'm saying that, hey, some error, look like the city not found. I can make it much more specific error, but in this case, to keep it short, I made it as a very generic error, say city not found. It means that if my this API is not working, most probably you have given a wrong city name or the city doesn't exist. Okay, fine. I have handled my error over here. Do you see I'm doing a throw new error from here? That means that I have to tackle this error sometime down the line. Okay. Now, next thing, this response object having a method called JSON. This particular method, when you call, that return another promise. So response.json at the line number 12, when I'm calling, I'm getting another promise. If I resolve that promise, then only I'll get the actual data that I'm looking for as a response of this API. So to get the resolved data, I have to resolve the promise. That's the reason I'm using await again here. So once I do await res.json, which returns a promise, I will get the resolve data over here. Now, as I get the resolved data, I pass it to another function to populate my DOM. I'll show that in a moment. But there is a situation, there is a possibility that this error might be thrown. How am I going to tackle this error? Very simple. I'm going to put every code inside this async function where I'm using the await inside a try catch block. So if there is an error happen, the control will directly come to this particular catch where I can take out the error message and then show that particular error message again on the DOM. And also I'm using a finally. Before I used to use .then, .catch, .finally to do some cleanup. Here I am using the try catch finally, that very general way of handling the error and the cleanup where I am hiding the loading, right? Because if I am getting a data after my API call, either I'll be displaying that data, or if I'm getting an error, I'll be displaying the error. I won't be displaying the loading again, right? The loading start in the beginning before I started making the API call, but after API call has finished, either I got the data or I got the error. In that case, I won't be showing the loading. So as a cleanup procedure, I'm just hiding the loading. So this is exactly what my async function is doing. The async function is handling two promises. To get the settled data, settled result of both the promises, it uses the await keyword in front of it, so that you don't have to really use .then, .catch, all the complex code. Rather, you have a very simplified syntax. Now, this is an async function which doesn't really return anything. It takes the data and doing some DOM manipulation. So what will happen? As it is an async function, JavaScript will automatically wrap this entire code inside a promise and then give it to you as a return value of this particular function. This function we are calling over here. We don't have to do anything with the return value. We don't have to do anything with that particular promise. JavaScript automatically wrapping of the resolve value of that. So I don't have to use await in front of it. This is what I was telling in the beginning. Whether you have to use await keyword in front of an async function is all depends. The promise that the async function return, whether you are interested into the settlement of that particular promise, whether you are interested into the result or error that is resolved or rejected by that promise. Okay, now I hope this is clear. Now let's take a look into the DOM manipulation also a little bit. After you get the data is being passed inside the display weather, this particular function. Once I go inside the display weather, it's a data. I'm taking the name of the city, I'm taking the temperature, I'm taking the description of the weather condition and the icon of the weather condition, and then creating an HTML and populating to the result div. That's it, using the inner HTML. Very simple, right? If it is an error, I am showing the error into the result div again, right, with the error data. How about the loading? I have a div called loading, isn't it? So there I am showing just this loading indicator. Once I have to hide the loading, I'm giving that empty string, so that loading indicator goes. Very, very simple way of handling. This code is with you. Please do the assignment project that I've given at the end of this session. I still have to cover a few more things, but once that is done, please go ahead, do that assignment by yourself. Now let's talk about the top level await. Sometime back we have seen, like, if we use the await keyword not inside a function, like at the global level, we were getting an error. The error clearly says it's a syntax error. It says await is only valid in async function. That means you can use await only inside an async function and the top level bodies of modules. That means if your script is a module, you can use the await keyword at the top of your script file without an async function. What is a module? How does it work? Why it allows it in this way? We are going to learn that when you go to the module 5 advanced JavaScript concepts session number 32. That's where we're going to learn about JavaScript modules. But for now, just remember that if you are getting an error like this, that await is only valid in async function, you have to make sure that you are using the await keyword either inside an async function, or if you are not using the script as a module, in that case there is one hack. The hack is to use an IIFE. We have spoken about IIFE in our function session, isn't it? So it is immediately invocable function is what IIFE, the function expression. So if you have to use, say, this one somewhere at the top level, not inside any designated function, you can put this entire code inside an IIFE. Let's see how you'll be doing it. We know IIFE follows a bit weird syntax, but if I break it as I have showed you in the function sessions, it is pretty easy. What you have to do first, you have to first put a parenthesis to the code segment that you want to put inside IIFE. Then you have to use the group operator, which is nothing but a pair of parentheses after that. We know that when you use this group operator after a function, it means that we are executing this function. And IIFEs are self-executing function. It means that you don't declare a function using a function name, again using the name letter pointer time, using double parentheses, you are invoking it. Wherever you are defining it, it will be invoked there itself, right? So that is the reason you'll be using this. Now after this, what you have to do, this bunch of code you have to put inside an async function, an async anonymous function. Why anonymous function? You don't have to define the function with a name, because you are not going to use that function elsewhere, as this IIFE will be executed here only. So you'll be putting this inside a function. First I will create an arrow function. So this is an arrow function. If I'm putting enter code inside this arrow function, let me format that for you. Reasonable? So this is an arrow function, and inside the arrow function I have put the entire code, and this arrow function is inside an IIFE. Now just that we are using await keyword, I have to make this function as an async function. So even with arrow function, to make the function async, you just need to put the async keyword and the space before the parenthesis starts. So now this is an async function which is inside an IIFE. Now wherever JavaScript sees this, it is going to execute this here itself, and the moment it get executed, it will invoke this async function, which means that all this await will be executed and I will get this stored data here itself. Let's see the output now. Now I get the output called pizzahub. It means that that particular API call has been made, and I have got this output over here. So I hope the rules are clear to you. If you have to use await, you have to use it inside a function with async keyword. If your script is a module, and of course if you're using the modern browsers, now most of us use the modern browser, then you can write this await statement at the top of your module script. You don't have to use these IIFEs and all at all. But if your script is not a module, in that case, if you still want to use the await at the top of your file because you want to get some value and then globally make this value available for using it in the rest of the script, you can do it with the help of IIFE. I hope this is clear to you. Now let's understand how do you handle multiple async await. It's no different than how we had handled multiple promises. We have learned to handle multiple promises using the promises own API like all, res, any, all settled, etc. In this case also it's exactly the same. So it means if something is returning a promise, for example, a fetch call that returns a promise, right? Now I'm using the fetch call 3 times by invoking or calling 3 different APIs, Pokemon APIs, and I have put all of them inside promise.allSettled in an array. We have learned about how promise.allSettled works from the last video. The promise.allSettled takes an array of all the promises and then it executes them concurrently. Then all the settled response of them will be part of an array and will be returned as a promise over here. So it means that if I have these responses right now, and if I just do console.log of responses, what I'm going to get? I'm going to get a promise. Inside that promise, if I resolve, I'll be getting the resolve value of each of these fetch APIs. Okay, so let's see that. So I get a promise. If I expand that, I will see a promise which is fulfilled, of course, and it has an array of 3. Basically, this is the result. If I expand that, I will see there are 3 results for 3 fetch call. Each of them are fulfilled. And if I expand that, I will see a value, and here I'm seeing the value is nothing but the response object, because we have learned the fetch call returns a promise. If I resolve the promise, I get the response object. From the response object, I can again do response.json, and then I can again resolve the promise to get the actual value. So what does it mean? If I go to the code once more, if I have this response, so I can pretty well do something like await this response and get the resolve value, isn't it? So I'll put this inside a function for now, an async function, say resolve Pokemons. So first I got the responses. Responses is a promise, and then I'm using await responses to get the result back. So let's do const results and then print this one instead. So now I have to call this function resolve Pokemon. And again, though it is an async function, still I don't need the await keyword in front of it, because I am not interested in resolving the promise that this particular function returns. It doesn't return anything basically. So now go ahead and see the output. In output, now instead of the promise, I'm getting the actual result back, and each of the result will be status fulfilled, and value will be what? Value will be the response object. Now beauty of this is, as I have these results, if I do const poke_1 results of 0, this is the first result, right? Get the value of it. This is the first value, which is nothing but this particular value, response object. Inside this response object, we'll have a JSON method which also returns a promise. So we can do .json, which returns a promise. I can use an await in front of it to get the result back. Now if I do console.log of pk_1 and see the output of it, you see I got the actual Pokemon output. This is the output of that API. So you got that point. So now this code is very much simplified. It is not using any .then, any .catch, anything as such. It is very simplified using await. All these are good, but there is a problem, right? I mean, I have made these 3 fetch calls. So I know that I can invoke them by pk_1. I can repeat this pk_2, pk_3 like this, and can do result 1 and then result 2, and then I can do the console.log of all the 3 results. That is great. But here the problem is I have to do this indexing manually, like 0, 1, 2, 3, like this. But if I'm interested in automating this, how am I going to do this? Rather, I don't know really how many promises I'm settling over here. This is dynamic. Here I know 3, so I'm able to do 0, 1, 2. But if I don't know, how are you going to change this code to get the similar outcome? So if you are dealing with the fetch API again, you have to remember the fetch call first gives you one promise. You have to resolve this promise, and then you have to call the .json method that will return another promise, and then you have to resolve that promise again to get the final result. That's what we have done over here, right? We have used the await again. Now as you are using the await at the end to get the final outcome, here you have to know the index that you are dealing with in this returned responses. But to mitigate that problem, you can change this code in the following way. Okay, now I've copied the same code and I am naming it as resolve Pokemon version 2. So in the resolve Pokemon version 2, fetch here returns a promise. Excellent. Now here let's call .then. The .then means it will give you a response, correct? Now from this response, if you call response.json, this is actually going to return another promise. So this means this particular call that you are having, like fetch this returns a promise, on top of that promise you have called a .then, this returns you finally the promise returned by response.json. Now can you do the same thing for all other 2? Okay, now you have a response which is nothing but an array where each of the element of an array is the promise returned by response.json. So here this results is having the promises resolved by responses.json. Okay, but this is still a promise that I had to again resolve using await. So I can get rid of even this await. Instead of this await over here, I can put this await here, because this code anyway return a promise. So if I put a await over there, this will return the value after this gets settled. The value is nothing but the resolve response after making each of this URL call. Now I don't need this line of code. Now instead of doing results, as results is no more, let us do responses. And then I don't need any of this code. I'll remove them off. And instead of calling resolve Pokemons, I'll be calling resolve Pokemons v2. And let's see the output. So I have an array now. If I expand, status is fulfilled. The value itself is now the direct Pokemon related details. See, it's a direct Pokemon details. Go to the second one. it's a Pokemon details. Go to the third one, it's a Pokemon details. Amazing, isn't it? So what you have done over here, if you just compare between the version 1 of the code and the version 2 of the code, is like very less number of code. You have taken an advantage of promise itself, because this returns a promise. You have called the then handler to get the response. From there you're getting the response.json, what you are returning. Response.json itself return another promise. Inside that, the actual value is there. So the first element is that promise, the second element is the promise, third element is the promise. Now all these promises are settled, give you the actual value that returns a promise. Now if you use an await in front of it, that means it will resolve automatically in that line itself, which will give you the final value. This is why async await is so powerful syntax, that you got rid of all the complexities of using promises and then chaining the dot then dot catch, all these things, or making the code very lengthier. Rather, use the await keyword appropriately in a position to get your result out. I hope this makes sense to you. I'm leaving both the version for you. Take a look. Oh yes, the time for our pizzahub application. So in the last video, we have refactored the callback version of pizzahub application with promises, and then chaining the then and catch, and we found the result. Now let's simplify this further with async and await. So instead of using all this then, we'll be using await. As you will be using await over here, we have to have this function as async function. So that is the first change. And also look at it carefully. Even if you get a code which is written using the promise then catch handler, and someone asks you, hey, can you just change this code to async await? Let's make it modern. What is the approach that you're going to take to make it modern? Okay, it's very, very simple. So in this case, I have get shop IDs, which returns a promise. And that is the reason I'm using this dot then. And inside this dot then, I'm getting this one as a result. So as you get this as a result, the first thing you would do is just copy it, Control C. Put this in front of your function and then do equals. And then put the await keyword over here and put a specifier like late or const over here. So this is your first promise refactoring to use async await. So it means now get shop IDs, return a promise. Using await, you have resolved that and got a shop ID. Excellent. Now let's go to the next line. The next line is getting the shop IDs. Getting the shop IDs first index value, you are calling this get pizza list, and it returns something called a pizzas. So let's take pizzas, copies pizzas. Let's do const pizzas equals to await of this guy. Get pizza list using shop ID 0. Okay. Now I have refactored this line also, remove this one. Now taking the pizzas, I'm calling get my pizza add-on. So let's copy this one. Let's put await in front of it, and this returns this particular pizza with add-ons. Great. So let's put const pizza with add-ons. This guy is also gone. We don't need it. Now from this pizza with add-ons, I'm performing an order. So I'll copy this one. I'll paste it over here. I'll put an await in front of it and then put an equals in front of it. And this return me this order. Okay. So I'll do const order. So now I don't need this line also. After getting the order, then I'm calling something called an confirm order. And if you remember, confirm order was not an async function. It was not returning any promise. So it means after getting the order, I can just cut this. I can call this confirm order. This also I don't need. Now there was a catch to handle the error scenario. And we know that for async and await, I don't need to use this catch. Rather, I'll be putting this entire thing inside a try catch, and then I'll be handling this error. And here I'll be saying console dot error, bad luck, no pizza for you today. So this is my simplified version of handling this using the async await. And if you notice clearly, I have not touched any other code over here to adapt with async await. This is why async await underneath is just a promise and handling of promise. It is just the syntax that I'm using to help me out with cleaner code. So you have seen it over here that I've just refactored the promises part of it with async await without touching any code, and this is going to work as before. Let's see that. Okay, so on the network call, Pizza Hub comes first, then the Pizza Hut, then the Pizza ID, the 2, then the order happened. And finally, if I go to console, I'll see the order of which Margarita has been placed on so and so date. So it is working as it was working before, but only difference here is we are using async await. So I hope this is clear. Now, if you get a legacy code written with promises and then catch all these things, and someone asks you to convert that code with async await, you know how to do it, what approach to take. Hey folks, let's talk about the task. I'm very serious in terms of teaching you guys, coming up with the content which is very much curated and high quality. I hope you like it. You got to be serious about the task and assignments, then only you are going to learn. So where do you find the task? Under the day 24 folder, you will find the task.md file. Go to task.md file. You will find a bunch of tasks that you have to see and you have to execute. The last task today is about a project. Here you are supposed to build a movie explorer app, the similar kind of app that we have built for weather. Build an app that lets users search movies using the OMDB API. Go to this particular site, omdbapi.com, create your account, get an API key, and this is your URL where you will be using the fetch API using this URL to get all the movie details. Now, what you have to do, the hint for this application is input box for search term. Below the search box, display the movie title, poster, and the year. Okay. And then allow user to search from that particular list. If the title is matching, the below portion will be showing the result that is matching the search term. And if nothing is matching the search term, show no result found. Okay. Use the async await, of course, DOM manipulation, and of course try and catch. We have done similar kind of project in DOM manipulation, but there we have not used async await. Now, as we are learning incrementally, let's put all our learning together and do this application. Once you have done it, come to Discord. You will find 40 days of JavaScript over here. There you have task assignment. Go ahead and start posting your task. We will look into it. The community will help. If you have any question, come to general, ask any questions that you have. We'll definitely get back to you if you are stuck. Also share what you are learning. That also great motivation for you and for everyone else. How to join this Discord? The link is in the description of this video. You can get it very easily. All the code that you have seen so far is in this organization called tapaScript. Please follow this because there are other projects that you might be interested in as well. You will find the repository called 40 days of JavaScript. That is where the day 24 folder will appear once this video is published. And you know the task.md file inside that, and all the code file will be inside that. If you like the work, please give a start to the repository. So with that, we are done for today. We'll be coming back again with another good video, great content as part of this particular module and 40 days of JavaScript. Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe to tapaScript because you don't want to miss the content that I'm creating right now or will be creating in future. Join me as a member. Thank you very much for all the support.